So Moondrop has become famous for adding value to almost every price category of IEM. But I was curious, can they add value to the most value-oriented section of IEMs, which is $10? These are the Moondrop corks. You'll notice by the design of them that they are very, very small, which is probably inspiration for the name. You'll also notice that they come in a very cool chassis. It's very transparent. You can see inside, you can see the driver and the connection to that driver. Now, these things are so small that basically all this chassis is that plastic holding that driver in position and the connection to that driver from the cable. And that's pretty much it. Now, I actually like this design quite a bit. It allows for a lot of flexibility for fitment. You can wrap these over ear like a more traditional IEM setup, or a more traditional just in-ear headphone setup of just hanging out straight from the ear. These things are obviously super lightweight, so they're not fatiguing to wear by any means. In fact, they're quite comfortable. And that's a benefit that even more expensive IEMs can't always get right. So another win for the corks. Visually, they're almost exactly the same except for a red indicator on the right side and a black indicator on the left side. Outside of this, the cable is okay, though it does seem to maintain squigglies. This cable also just has a typical splitter and right angle connector for the 3.5 millimeters. So pretty standard stuff here. This IEM really doesn't seem like a crazy great value when you pick it up, but I actually think that the sound for this is pretty impressive. Now, it does seem to lean a lot more on its mid-range and its mid-bass capability than any other region. It's a little bit soft in the treble response and a little bit soft in the sub-bass response. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise given the physical traits of the chassis, but I do think that for mid-range, this is actually pretty great and provides a actually pretty pleasing experience for $10. Now, in order to judge the sound of this, I did actually have to go with some aftermarket tips that did bring up the price to about $20. These are the Moondrop spring tips, which are wonderful. I like these things a lot. Now, I know this is cheating, but I wasn't able to judge this on the stock tips because I couldn't actually get a perfect fit for both ears at the same time. It was kind of weird. For some reason, the tips that these come with, I need somewhere in between a medium and a large, but they only come with small, medium, and large. And I couldn't get a perfect fit between that medium and large section. So I really wasn't able to get a good seal on these IEMs until I went to aftermarket tips. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Now, because of that price increase to about $22 for the total package for me, I'm actually going to be comparing these in a separate video against the Chews, which I'll be reviewing next. So it'll be kind of a $20 IEM shootout. Now, an interesting thing about the sound here is that it actually doesn't rely on what I think is a cheap IEM trope, which is giving you a V-shaped experience, a little bit of highs and a little bit of lows, and people seem to think that's good. This actually focuses mostly on the mid-range, and that is very different from most of the super budget IEMs that I've tried. Because of that, I think that this thing actually not only competes in the $10 price category, but should be considered one of the best of the IEMs that I've personally tried for that price. Now, I do want to analyze the performance here of the treble response. It's not terrible. The resolution is actually fairly good. It's just a forwardness issue. Now, this seems to drop off basically after about 5K. It seems to have this slow descent after about 5K. So anywhere between 15K and up, you're probably not really hearing much of that unless it's really, really, really forward in the music, which it almost never is. This does do a great job of avoiding sibilance and harshness in the S&T range, about 7 to 9K. It doesn't seem to have any issues with that region at all, which is shocking because that seems to be an area that most budget headphones, IEMs, and even speakers have issues with. This kind of glides right over that region without presenting any notable issues. Though because it's still on the early end of that slope down, it doesn't seem to have this darkened effect to the S's and the T's. It seems very inclusive with the rest of the mid-range and provides for a detailed sounding vocalist without being harsh or too dull. Now, vocals and mid-range in general are really the strong suit of this headphone. Another benefit of this is actually its imaging and placement capability of those vocalists. The center imaging, the center voicing size is excellent. It's kind of larger in scale than a lot of V-shaped IEMs that tend to be really small for their vocalists. And it seems very full. And, you know, as far as $10 goes, extremely complete for the vocalist. And it seems to adapt to different vocalization styles. You can go from Amy Winehouse and Adele style all the way down to Chris Jones, all the way down to Avi Kaplan, or you can go back to, you know, the 80s recordings. some of the 90s country music, and it all seems to be very, very not only forgiving for recording errors, but also fulfilled in a lot of those vocal kind of characteristics and different vocal timbres. Seems to be capable of a lot of different vocal styles. For $10, this is extremely impressive, especially because this seems to be an impossible task for a lot of other IEMs. There is a cost to this because of its vocal forwardness, its mid-range forwardness. You do get, again, that reduction in treble performance. It's not a super detailed sounding IEM, though I wouldn't call it bad. Even competing, you know, with higher priced IEMs, it's not terrible. There's definitely a difference between this and something like a Moondrop Aria, but you know, for 10 bucks or even 20, the resolution is pretty decent, but it's not going to be a shockingly resolving IEM. Bass speed is both good and bad. Throughout the mid-bass department, the bass seems quite fulfilled, and it's got enough mid-bass to fully complete the sound of a guitar or lower range vocalist or a deep piano note, but you're not really going to be getting a lot of sub-bass out of this. The sub-bass is not really going to be a strong component. It's also not a strong component of the Moondrop Choose, just as a slight spoiler. But as far as like fulfilling a natural instrument and not really an artificial beat, it's pretty good. But that lack of sub bass, I do think, should be a little bit of a mark against it, because even cheap IEMs have figured out how to do sub bass quite well even. So that limitation in performance should be a notable feature and should set your expectations on what exactly you're going to get with this IEM. Imaging and soundstage, pretty good actually. This has a very confident mid-range forwardness to it, and it seems very well isolated. And then the soundstaging is actually pretty decent for the price range. Something a little bit higher price, like those 10 audios, like the $50 price category, are gonna sound a lot wider. But the soundstaging is not as bad as you might think. And the imaging is a lot more precise than you might think for this price category. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with the sound of this thing. It is mid-range forward. I'm gonna keep saying that because when you get this, that's gonna be obvious, and you're gonna be like, okay, like there's not a lot of top end and there's not a lot of low end. And so mid-range is basically what you get. Now, is that a bad deal for $10? Hell no. In fact, this, I think, performs better for mid-range than most of the sub $100 headphones that I've actually come across. It's just the other areas that suffer a little bit in sacrifice of that mid-range performance. Okay, some additional notes. These things are very, very small. I would not be surprised if they're easy to crush, if they're just plastic. I don't know that I would have a high faith in their durability ability. They do have, for actually a couple bucks more, a microphone option with a 4-pin connector to go to something like a cell phone. And I think those are like $13 or something like that. Now, when it comes to the price edition of the aftermarket tips, that does bring this up to $20. Again, I want to give a shout out to a future video I'll be making, in fact, right after I film this, of a comparison between these and the Choose for about $20. And that's actually a more competitive comparison than you might think, because both headphones are very good, but they're not good at the same stuff. Okay, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. Until the next one, my name's Josh, signing off. Peace.